Ask anyone to state what they think is the greatest movie of all time, and you will likely hear the usual suspects: The Godfather, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, It's a Wonderful Life, Goodfellas, and so on. But for me, the answer is simple: Die Hard. Die Hard is by far and away my favorite movie of all time, a film I consider a cinematic masterpiece in storytelling, character development, and cinematography. Released in the summer of 1988, Die Hard was a game changer in Hollywood and continues to be ranked among the greatest action movies ever made. And the film's profound impact on the genre can't be understated, having become a blueprint for many action films that followed. In a career-defining role, Bruce Willis's portrayal of the relatable, believable, likable, straight-talking, chain-smoking, ass-kicking, no-nonsense New York police detective John McClane is exquisite. And Alan Rickman, appearing in his first ever feature film, having already become an accomplished stage actor, blew audiences away with his portrayal of the antagonist, Hans Gruber. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Yes, Die Hard is an excellent movie, but the greatest of all time? While you might not agree that Die Hard is the greatest movie of all time, there are a multitude of reasons why the film should be in contention for that title. And it is for these reasons that for me, it is my personal greatest of all time. The film's ability to create and maintain tension throughout the entire film, the cat and mouse game between John McClane and Hans Gruber, the confined setting of a locked down skyscraper, the depth of the storytelling, the exceptional soundtrack, the masterful lighting and camera work, the captivating writing, the stellar cast, the list of reasons for its brilliance goes on and on. While ultimately the title of greatest movie of all time is subjective, for me, Die Hard encapsulates everything I love about cinema: thrilling storytelling, captivating characters, and unforgettable moments. And in this video, I'll take a look back at what I believe to be the most important aspects of the film that set it apart from the rest, and why I regard it as the greatest movie ever made. What is one thing that all great movies have in common? They all have great characters. Characters that we care about, characters we love, characters we hate, characters we cheer for, and characters we believe in. Die Hard is no exception to this rule. First, we have our hero, John McClane. Personally, I've never been able to look at Bruce Willis in any other movie after Die Hard and not picture him as John McClane. Armageddon is about John McClane stopping a giant asteroid from destroying Earth. Unbreakable is about John McClane discovering he has superpowers. Bandits is about John McClane after he started robbing banks. You get my point. John McClane is Bruce Willis's most iconic role. John McClane is an everyman. Unlike the typical action hero star of those days, John McClane isn't a grizzled combat veteran like Rambo. He doesn't have the gigantic muscles of Colonel John Matrix in Commando. He's a normal cop who finds himself thrown into this crazy situation where he has to fight to survive to save his wife and the other hostages. When we are introduced to McClane in the very first scene of the movie, we see him gripping his airplane seat in fear as the plane comes into land, and the passenger next to him trying to put him at ease and giving him some crazy advice. This scene doesn't just tell us he's afraid of flying. It immediately gives the audience the impression that John is out of his comfort zone and far from home. He's vulnerable, he has fears, he's just like everyone else. After finding his way out of the airport terminal, he discovers Argyle, the limo driver, waiting for him. And rather than sitting in the back of the limousine, John sits up front, which further cements our image of John as someone who's not privileged and is not comfortable being chauffeured around in a limousine. Then finally, when John reaches the party on the 30th floor of the Nakatomi Plaza, he is surrounded by all these bigwig executives and Nakatomi staff in their fancy suits and dresses drinking champagne, while John is wearing a flannel shirt and corduroy jacket. One of the drunk yuppies even kisses John, wishing him a Merry Christmas. All of these opening scenes are perfectly crafted to help the audience relate to John, to show that he's just your average guy. He's believable and likable, the the kind of guy you'd like to have a beer with. Shortly thereafter, we see John and Holly argue about her using her maiden name of Gennaro rather than McClane, before Holly leaves John to go give a speech to the rest of the staff. This final scene before the action begins is crucial. It shows us that while John and Holly live on opposite sides of the country and are obviously going through a difficult time in their marriage, they love each other very much, and this adds to the pressure John is about to be under when the robbery and hostage situation commences. Now let's talk about Hans Gruber. What a character. As mentioned previously, this was Alan Rickman's first feature film appearance, and what an incredible job not only he did, but also the writers. Our introduction to Hans is in the basement of the Nakatomi Plaza, after he and the rest of his team arrive in a truck to begin their heist. As they exit the vehicle, Hans emerges in the middle of the pack, and the camera focuses in on him, showing us that he is the leader and this is his plan. In the script, this is written as, "Reveal Hans Gruber, impeccably dressed, lean and handsome. He steps out into the lobby like he owns the building." And in a way, he does. When Hans locks the front entrance to the Nakatomi Plaza, he takes a moment to stop and look to see the coast is clear. It's a subtle pause, but it's enough to show the audience that Hans is calculated, motivated, determined, and organized. As Hans and his crew arrive at the 30th floor, the elevator doors open and the heist begins. Bear in mind, at this point, 25 minutes into the film, we haven't even heard Hans speak yet. Everything we know about him has come from his body language, yet we feel we already know a lot about him and his intentions. And when he does speak, his voice is captivating, drawing in the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen.
He then prowls the room in search of Joseph Takagi, the president of Nakatomi Trading, listing fact after fact about him, revealing how prepared he is for this moment. And when Takagi finally reveals himself, we see a slight glimpse of Hans's more charming side, as he displays a slight smile before Takagi is taken away. As the film progresses, we start to see a shift in Hans. As the heist begins, Hans is full of confidence. His plan is being executed to perfection. Everything is under control. But the more John McClane interrupts those plans, the more flustered and panicked we see Hans become. Hans first learns that there's someone loose in the building after John kills Tony, and rather than just steal Tony's gear and hide the body, John decides to send a message, putting Tony in the elevator and writing on his chest,
"Now I have a machine gun."
Ho, ho, ho.
Such an incredible moment, and the first instance when we hear Hans realize that his perfectly planned operation might have a spanner in the works. We then see John hiding above the elevator, and it becomes clear that John didn't do this just to send a message, but to gain information about the thieves, as he writes their names on his arm. It can't be understated how well Bruce Willis portrays the character of John McClane throughout the film, and looking back on it now, it looks so obvious that the role was made for him, but the role was actually offered to a number of other actors before being offered to Willis. In fact, the role was initially offered to Frank Sinatra. Back in 1968, Sinatra played the lead in the movie The Detective, based on a novel by Roderick Thorpe. The sequel to this book was Nothing Lasts Forever, which Die Hard is based on, and when the book was originally to be turned into a movie, the producers were contractually obliged to offer Sinatra the part first. Being in his 70s, Sinatra turned it down, but I can't help but wonder what the movie would have looked like had Sinatra decided to go for it. Before settling on Willis, a number of other actors were offered the role of John McClane, including Sylvester Stallone, Harrison Ford, Richard Gere, and Clint Eastwood. The very fact that Willis was even offered the part is incredible, considering he wasn't an action movie star and was mainly known for his role on the comedy television series Moonlighting. But when Willis was offered the part, he saw it as a huge opportunity and decided to go for it. And boy are we glad he did. As the film progresses, we see John disrupt Hans's plans more and more, eventually leading to their final showdown outside the vault. The performance both actors put in was absolutely outstanding, and this alone gives the film incredible rewatchability in my opinion. I could go on for hours about all the little intricacies in their performance, but I think it's worth taking a look at a few of the film's secondary characters, as they have important parts to play in driving the story forward. Holly is an interesting character. It's established early on that she is a strong woman, career-driven and passionate, and we can see her confidence and strength in action when she stands up to Hans. Their first real interaction is when Holly makes some requests for the rest of the hostages, and I think this scene is great. There's a moment when Holly tells Hans that since he killed Takagi, everyone is now looking to her, and Holly stares at Hans, refusing to avert her gaze, showing him she is not afraid of him, even if she is on the inside. Shortly before leaving, Holly casts a glance over at the photo of her, John, and their children, which she had placed face down on the table earlier in the film, and this starts the tension that builds throughout the movie, as to whether Hans will discover who Holly really is or not. The first break in this tension comes from Ellis, Holly's douchebag co-worker, your typical unlikable, arrogant, egotistical office clown. In the very first scene at the Nakatomi building, we see Ellis hitting on Holly, trying to invite her out to dinner, and later on Ellis is snorting a certain white powder from Holly's desk. He comes across as an overconfident schmuck, but when Hans and his crew arrive, Ellis panics, looking around like a lost child. Later in the film, Ellis meets his demise when he builds up the courage to try and speak to Hans and gives away John McClane's true identity.
Hans, Bobby.
While not the most likable, Ellis is still a great character, and he exists purely to drive the plot forward at this point in the movie. Now is a good time to talk about another secondary character that isn't particularly likable, Richard Thornburg, the arrogant, self-centered news reporter who is the first to break the story about what's happening in the Nakatomi building to the media. It is through him that Holly's true identity as John's wife is revealed, when Thornburg, for some ridiculous reason, decides it's a good idea to put John and Holly's kids on TV, something that helps Hans put two and two together. This is a critical moment in the story, as it signals the climactic end that is to follow. There are a few other secondary characters that I love. Argyle, the limo driver, seems to be a bystander to the action unfolding above him in the building, and we get a few comedy moments from him throughout the film. But he ends up playing a crucial role near the end, taking out the getaway car, an ambulance, and its driver, Theo, in the basement. Another incredible character is Carl, the brother of Tony, who was killed early on in the film by John. Actor and ballet dancer Alexander Godunov puts in an incredible performance from start to end, and his character arc is driven by the death of his brother and his lust for revenge against McClane. The fight sequence between him and John is particularly memorable. But my favourite secondary character, and I'm sure many other people's, is Sergeant Al Powell. We aren't introduced to Powell until 45 minutes into the film, where we see him buying a ridiculous amount of Twinkies, which he claimed are for his wife, although the cashier didn't seem convinced. Powell just happens to be the first police officer on scene when he is asked by dispatch to investigate what's happening at the Nakatomi Plaza after John's radio transmission earlier. Upon arrival, all seems normal, and Powell goes to leave, but he quickly becomes embroiled in the turmoil when John drops a German on him.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Powell is such an important character to the story because he's John's support. He's the only person on the outside of the building that's communicating with John and keeping him going. The rest of the police force, particularly Deputy Chief of Police Dwayne T. Robinson, are completely incompetent and don't seem to want McClane's help. But Al stands by John and keeps his spirits up as best as possible over the course of the night. we learn that Powell works a desk job at the police department after accidentally shooting a child earlier in his career. But despite not having shot a gun since then, it is Powell who saves the day at the very end of the film, when the seemingly indestructible Carl, whom McClane had already hung, makes his last stand at the foot of the building. All of these secondary and tertiary characters exist to drive the main story forward. That is the battle between John McClane and Hans Gruber. They are the stars of this show, and the entire story revolves around the cat and mouse game between the two. The chemistry between them is what makes this film, from a character perspective, so successful. John and Hans are two completely different personalities. John is a street-smart, rough-around-the-edges cop. Hans, a book-smart, sophisticated and privileged individual. Despite being the two stars of the film, there are only 2 moments in the whole movie where they come face to face. First, there is this incredible scene where Hans goes up to the roof to check something and bumps into John, and we see Hans use his intellect to pretend to be one of the hostages, something we believe John has fallen for at first. However, as the scene progresses, there's this tension building, where we know that Hans knows who John is, but we're not quite sure if John knows who Hans is. It's incredibly well acted by both, and leads to one of the most important and memorable scenes of the entire movie. Interestingly, this scene wasn't originally in the script and was added during production. Writer Stephen E. D'Souza and director John McTiernan were trying to figure out a way Hans and John could meet face to face in a believable way. One day on set, Alan Rickman was joking around doing different voices and imitations, and this gave D'Souza the idea of having John and Hans meet, with Hans pretending to be a hostage by using an American accent. D'Souza eventually accepted the idea, and it was added into the film after changing one of the earlier scenes where Hans kills Takagi, because originally in this scene, John could see Hans and would know what he looks like, so the scene was changed so that John could only see Takagi and not Hans. The next time McClane and Gruber see each other face to face is at the very end of the movie, when Hans is scrambling to complete his heist. More about that later. Die Hard has an incredible cast of characters, with some of the best acting I've ever seen in an action movie. But that acting is coupled with some incredible cinematography throughout the film. Die Hard is full of some of the most incredible visuals of any movie I can think of, let alone action movies. After sending Tony down in the elevator with that iconic message on his sweater, John heads for the roof for the first time in order to use his radio to signal for help. Hans and his crew hear this transmission and realize it's likely John is on the roof, as this is the best place to transmit, and when Carl and a few others find John, a firefight commences. The camera work in this scene is incredible, capturing the mood of the scene perfectly, as it appears John is cornered with nowhere to go. There's also this excellent slow panning shot of Carl on the roof as he stalks McClane. Eventually, McClane makes it back into the building, and after getting through a large air circulation fan, we get one of the most iconic and incredible scenes in the movie. Cornered in the building with no safe passage away from Carl and the other terrorists, John decides to escape down the ventilation shaft. The camera angles, the lighting, the music, the acting, everything about this scene is captivating. And even having seen this movie 1,000 times, I still get nervous watching this scene. In a desperate move, John reaches out from one side of the ventilation shaft to the other, clinging onto the strap from his gun, the abyss extending endlessly below him. And then, the strap snaps, sending John plummeting, but miraculously he grabs onto a ledge and pulls himself into the narrow air duct. In this scene, John was originally supposed to grab onto the first ledge, but John's stunt double, Kai Johnson, who was performing the stunt, accidentally missed and fell, but the editors decided to keep this shot in the film and have John grab hold of a lower ledge. A truly heart-stopping scene, made even better by the incredible cinematography. Like any good action movie, Die Hard has plenty of guns and explosions, but what I love about it is it's not excessive. McClane only kills 10 people in the entire film, and firefights and explosions are only used when necessary. For example, in the scene where the LA police decide it's a good idea to attempt to infiltrate the building, a large police RV is destroyed with a rocket launcher, and Hans shows his ruthless side by asking for it to be hit again, prompting McClane to launch the C4 he stole earlier down the elevator shaft on a chair with a monitor strapped to it. Incredible. These explosions aren't just in the film for the sake of it, they're driving the plot forward, signaling a shift in both McClane and Gruber's attitudes. They're both getting more desperate and ruthless. Hans is desperate to try and cling back control of the situation he can see slipping away from him. McClane is desperate to bring this nightmare to an end and rescue his wife. One of the largest and most spectacular moments of the whole film is the explosion on the roof. In a last-ditch effort to buy himself enough time to steal what he wants and make his escape, Hans sets off the explosives positioned on the roof. John makes his escape by jumping off the building with a fire hose tied around his waist, and the helicopter with the FBI agents inside, who have been firing at McClane thinking he is a terrorist, gets destroyed. We also get this nail-biting moment when the fire hose falls behind John and he struggles to get it untied in time. Not only is this scene visually spectacular, it signals the closing moments of the heist, as John safely makes it back into the building and finds Hans and Eddie outside the vault, with Holly being held at gunpoint. The cinematography is excellent here. The silhouette of McClane limping down the corridor, covered in blood, sparks flying everywhere. John has been through hell, and this is his final stand. But John has one final trick up his sleeve. He pretends to surrender to Hans by throwing his weapon on the ground, but his pistol is taped to his back, and he's able to distract Hans for long enough to quickly draw his weapon and shoot Hans and Eddie. While Eddie dies instantly, Hans falls back out of the window, grabbing hold of Holly's wrist in a last-ditch effort to save himself. But the heist comes to an end when John releases Hans's grip on Holly's wrist by unlocking her watch, and Hans plummets to his death. A truly incredible end to an incredible movie. Die Hard will forever hold a firm place in cinematic history as a true classic. And while the debate over the greatest movie of all time will never be answered due to its innate subjectiveness, for me the answer is, and probably always will be, Die Hard. What sets Die Hard apart is its ability to seamlessly blend action, suspense, and character-driven storytelling into a riveting experience that has captivated audiences for decades. The film is a masterclass in the art of cinematic character development, creating a dynamic and tension-filled narrative that keeps viewers on the edge of their seats. For me, Die Hard is one of those films that no matter how I'm feeling, no matter what time of year it is always an enjoyable experience. And although I've seen the film countless times and could probably recite the entire script at this point, every time I watch it, it's exciting. For the 30th anniversary of the film, a special screening was hosted in Los Angeles outside Fox Plaza, the setting for the Nakatomi Plaza. And I'm praying that they do this for the 40th anniversary, as I will certainly be there. Oh, and one last point. In my opinion, Die Hard is most certainly a Christmas movie. My thanks to you for watching. This is a video I've been looking forward to making for a long time. I truly love this film and hope you've enjoyed this look back at some of what makes it the greatest movie ever made, at least in my opinion. If you haven't subscribed yet, it would mean the world to me if you could. And don't forget to like the video and leave a comment below letting me know your thoughts on the movie. Thank you everyone for all of your support, and see you again in the next video.